Know that this is a production, if you will, of the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy. And we've hit the ground, if you will, running. And we're so thankful to be able to be here, thankful to the way the students have responded and continue to help us sharpen our imagination and our focus. We're so grateful for our colleagues, professors, administrators. The sister I just saw in the cafeteria dancing reminded me that you can dance even when the clouds are out. We thank tonight for our hold off on introducing the panel that's going to be led by our Assistant Director for Partnerships, Jonathan Hartgrove. He will be doing that and telling us how we proceed in that way. I want to thank God tonight and make sure you know our interim assistant director, which is Dr. Vita Mays. Dr. Mays, would you, where's Dr. Mays? She's probably in the back doing something there. So, a little bit about Dr. Mays' history is she is from Memphis, Tennessee. Her father was a gospel preacher of some renown and a gospel singer. He was clearly and deeply, as her family is, committed to the social gospel and to public theology. And her father was a part of those who invited Dr. King to come to Memphis. And if you ever see the picture of them bearing his assassined body to the plane to take him home where Coretta is, her father is one of the pallbearers. But then also continued to lead in carrying out and for finishing that particular part of the work. So we're so thankful she's been here. In the interim, she will be releasing in some time as we bring on a permanent person, but we're so thankful for her service. I also want you to know Ms. Ebony Gaines. If you call our office at any time, this lady back here, Ebony, the powerful young sister, brilliant, and if you ever wanted somebody to be in an office so that when people called, it's the best experience of their whole day, then you want to have Ebony on point. And if you also want to have somebody that will protect your office and make sure things go right and are done right, and if people have anything smart to say about it, will defend the office, you put Mays and Gaines together and you got a team. You don't have to worry about it. We also want to introduce tonight, and I'll do it further. I'll do that in just a minute because it's going to be part of the one. I do see a few people. My sister is in the house. I mean, my sister for real. I love her. And sometime my part-time pastor, if you will, but Reverend Dr. Nancy Petty, who is here, is one of our, yeah. So they can see how much we favor Nancy. Just wave your hand. Yeah, that's my sister. That's my, yeah. And we're so thankful tonight for her. We're so thankful for two of our artists in residence. Artists in residence is something as a part of the center. Joe, where's Joe? Who is a tremendous media person, but here he is a resident artist. He specializes in capturing the eyes and the faces of oppressed people in their situations, and is going to be doing some of that work. So he goes to the places that oftentimes people don't want to stay too long, and he spends time actually putting together portraits and capturing people and give them dignity by saying how important it is not only that we know the numbers, like 5 million people, this, that, and other, but we can see the people and their eyes. And I'm glad also, I think, and Brother Elliott is here tonight. He's one of our, I consider him a mentee along with Roz, tremendous young man, just finished his master's up in public policy. But what you should know about this young man, in addition to that, the lineage of his roots, and that is that when you look at the Selma to Montgomery March, And when you look at Bloody Sunday, which will be recognized just a few days coming, there is an iconic picture of a woman being beaten and John Lewis holding her in his arms. She lived to be almost 100 years old. And I can remember before she died, I went down there to preach, and the second year I was there, she leaned over and said, well, I think that I might be able to go on now because you all can handle and hold. You remember, y'all, she said that to both of us as we were sitting there, that she could die because she believed that we would continue. This is her nephew of Annie, say her whole name, Amelia Boyington, who kept alive, along with about 8 other people, the movement for voting rights years before King or John Lewis or Snick, before Diane Nash, any of them were there. She was in that. She was an incredible, powerful, erudite teacher, but she was clearly a movement woman. And when she got up from that beating, she came right back. She came right back. And Elliot has that same kind of tenacity running through his veins, and so we're thankful. And then I'm going to say a few things, but before we do that, I want to read a Psalm of Life by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who's an abolitionist. And my son introduced me to this poem. Interestingly, my son is studies at Johns Hopkins and getting a PhD in immunology and biotech, but he has this other side of him where he's deeply into poetry and art. And he said to me one day, he said, Daddy, sometimes you need a psalm or poem that can help you when life is just life. Because you know, life can just be life. You can't figure it out, explain it. It doesn't run in a linear like this. You know, it can be this way. And I'm growing to understand now what my people used to sing, and you'll understand it better by and by. You won't understand all about life right now. It has many tributaries, turns, and twists. But Longfellow had gone through some pain in his life regarding the movement, regarding death of his family members, his own hurt, some of his personal relationships. And he wrote these words. It's called a Psalm of Life. And I think it has something to say to us in the midst of all that's going on now. What do I do with this thing called life? I don't know about you, but I had to struggle with it when I met a woman from Montgomery, Selma, who lost 25 members of her immediate family within a 30-mile radius, primarily because Alabama would not extend Medicaid. And they died because they just were scared, literally, to go to the hospital. So they held on, didn't know if they had COVID, but were afraid to go to the emergency room, afraid. And she lost 25, her whole immediate family was wiped out in a month. And after hearing that one day, I became kind of musing. I was musing, and I don't know if it's depression or, I actually asked God the question, why am I still here? Why am I still here? What is the point? I mean, this woman lost 20, she didn't deserve this. People deserve, I have health care, she didn't. You just start struggling with what we call theodicy in formal studies, and struggling with that. And why am I still here? I know I've faced death before. Why is it that this poor young lady could lose 25 members of her family in a 30-mile radius, and why am I still here? I know I've been around COVID. I have an immune deficiency. Why did it take those 25 and not me? And over in the night, the ancient one, the spirit of the times, said, wrong question. Wrong question. Because the truth of the matter is, none of us can ask that question. Why are we still here? You don't even know the dangers seen and unseen that you faced. And you won't know it till sometime later when the video recorder of your life is turned on and you can see behind you. So none of us know, why am I still here? But maybe we can know, or at least probe and wrestle with, what am I supposed to be doing since I'm still here? I mean, the truth of the matter is all of us got 6 minutes at best. If any of us were without breath for 6 minutes, it wouldn't be a good thing. There are some folk that can hold their breath 15, 20 minutes, but they're trained and but for most of us, 6 minutes without air would not be a pretty, if we were still living. So what do we do with our 6 minutes, our 6 hours, our 6 days, our 6 weeks, our 6 months, our 6 years, or our 60 years? And maybe the question, the answer is not, why am I still here? But what do I do? Longfellow was wrestling with that question. And in the 1800s, he wrote this, a psalm of life. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real. Life is earnest, and the grave is not the goal. Dust thou art, and to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow finds us farther than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field and battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb driven cattle, but instead be a hero in the strife. Trust no future, however pleasant it seems. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present, heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother or sister, seeing those footprints shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing. Let us learn to labor and to wait. And in a real sense, whether we're dealing with housing issues or voting rights issues, whatever comes in life, whatever is our calling and our gift, we are to act. They used to say, we don't get to choose the birth date, and we don't get to choose the death date, but we live in the dash. We live in the dash. And how we act is not just for us, but it's for someone else that may be ready to quit, may have faced life earnest and real, and then they look down and see our footprints and find out our story and what was going on, and yet we kept on going on despite what was going on. And they grab that example and they too keep on. The question is never, why am I still here? The question is, what am I to do with my still here? Yara Allen goes across this country as a child of the Pentecostal tradition, and she performs something called theomusicology, where she literally embeds herself in people's minds and hearts in community where they are struggling. And by the way of the Spirit, she listens to what they say. She looks at how they walk. She looks at the tilt of their head and the batting of their eyes and the tears in the corners of their eye. She listens to the shrill of their voices as they describe their reality, whether it is being without housing or whether it is not having health care. And in the midst of that, she listens until she hears a song or a rhythm or a note. And then she begins to work from there and produce a song for the movement and a song for that community and a song for that issue. She's done it time and time again. It is a gifting that comes from something much higher than us. She's the only person in our entire movement that can at any point when we're having rallies, stop the rally. She can walk up to me and she can say, Reverend Barber, we got to sing something right here. Because it's not about singing. It's about finding the key that the movement is in at that moment. Because every justice moment has a song. She's a gift. And she's now a visiting artist along with Joe here at Yale and to the Center of Public Policy and Public Theology and Public Policy. And tonight we want to have her open and lead us in one of those original songs that grew out of listening until she could hear the note and hear the rhythm. Yara Allen.
Good evening. Y'all look so good. You look like a choir. So I'm just saying, we're holding tryouts. I know you didn't know. So do this for me. La. You're in. You're in. That was good. So we're talking about the crisis in housing. And for some time now, we've seen, I'm in the movement, and I know that you, as you move about, have seen the devastation. And whether we were in the holler in West Virginia, or the Tenderloin out west, or in Western North Carolina, the crisis has been great. And 2020, COVID hit. The crisis, it just exacerbated that crisis. And you know how hard it is to see someone lose a home, someone sleeping on the street. I'll never forget out in the Tenderloin. We were out there at Glide Memorial Church. And as we were getting into the vehicle that night after the service, I looked over at Pastor Uzziel, and we were waiting on our ride, and it just started to rain, and there was a lady curled up on the cement with only her hands for a pillow. And she looked to be about 9 months pregnant. And she got up, she walked to the sidewalk, she stretched, she took care of a few personal needs, and she walked back to that place and curled up. And I've never been able to unsee that. When I complain about my water's moving too slow, I've never been able to unsee that. And it hushes my mouth and makes me grateful. So there's a song that was born in Western North Carolina. We've actually been singing this here on campus just a little bit. And there's one of our singers right here. So we got a ringer. And the song was born during the fight with Duke Energy around the coal ash spill. And it was during that time that people lost homes. They became sick. They couldn't work. They couldn't pay for their homes. So they were homeless. And this song was born that night that we listened to all those testimonies in a town hall meeting. People standing and talking about how their bodies were withering and their children going through remission. 10 years old, 14 years old, in remission. Let that sink in. And so that night, this song was born. Somebody's hurting my brother. And it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Because the thing about music is, once that tension is there, we recently talked about this here. Once that tension is there, somebody's hurting my brother, somebody's taking our health care, somebody's doing this. And it's gone on far too long. Well, what is the release? What's the answer? We won't be silent anymore. And so I'm going to ask you in choir fashion if you would stand. And we ask that you stand. Our motto is we stand together because we stand together. So it's sort of symbolic. We're going to do this pretty fast, but I always do this just to get a mental picture. Raise your hands if you're an alto. Raise your hands if you're a soprano, tenor, bass, baritone. Now, some people did not raise your hand. Okay. Raise your hands if you are a shower singer only. Some of the same people raise their hands. Something's not right. All right? And so the act of generosity that I ask you to engage in is that if the person next to you is vocally challenged, lend them your note. But I promise you it's not coming back the same way, so have grace, okay? All righty. Here is the choir rehearsal version, and then we're going to go right into it because it's sort of like a call and response. I'm going to say, somebody's hurting my brother. Now, this is a zipper song, which means you can drop in the lyrics that you need to drop in. Wherever you go, whatever your fight is, drop those lyrics in. You don't have to stick to brother, sister. Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long. So I'll say, let's start with that. Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on, and your response is far too long. Yes, it's gone on. Far too long. It's gone on. Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on. And then all together we'll say, and we won't be silent anymore. And I'm going to give you the tune, and we're going to take off with this, all right? Oh, somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long. Oh, you've heard it? Yes, now watch this second one. Yes, it's gone on. It's going to move a little bit. Far too long. I tell you it's gone on far too. Oh, somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too. And we won't be silent anymore. Are we ready to travel on the road now? Y'all sound good. All right, let's put the rhythm to it. Ready? I may take it up just a bit. I never stay where I rehearse. Grace, y'all. Oh, somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on. Far too long. Yes, it's gone on. Far too long. I tell you it's gone on. Oh, somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on. And we won't be silent. Can we put some more volume on that? Did you hear? Somebody's hurting our families, and it's gone on. Far too long. Yes, it's gone on. Far too long. I tell you it's gone on. Oh, somebody's hurting our families, and it's gone on. And we won't be silent anymore. Did you know somebody's sleeping outside, y'all, and it's gone on? Yes, it's going on. I tell you it's going on. Oh, somebody's sleeping outside, y'all, and it's going on. And we won't be silent anymore. Did you hear? Somebody's hurting our loved ones, and it's going on. Yes, it's going on. I tell you, it's going on. Oh, somebody's hurting our loved ones, and it's going on. And we won't be silent anymore. Can we do one more? Oh, somebody's taking our health care, and it's going on. Yes, it's going on. I tell you, it's going on. Oh, somebody's taking our health care, and it's going on. And we won't be silent anymore. Hear me, if we've been just a little too quiet, you know it's going on. Yes, it's going on. I tell you, it's going on. Oh, if we've been just a little too quiet, you know it's going on. And we won't be silent anymore. Can we just keep singing that part? And we won't be. And we won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent. And we won't be silent anymore. Now can we stop clapping and just sing that? And we won't be silent anymore. One more time. And we won't be silent anymore. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That lady that night, she died later. She told us that night she would not live, but she lives in that song. And it was her expressions that allowed Yara to hear, because wounds talk, and allowed her to hear. And all over the country now, people sing that song. And places, I can be on the plane and somebody will say, we won't be silent anymore. It's become one of the anthems of zipper song anthems of the movement. Tonight is the first edition of a lecture series that we envisioned at the center. We would have at least 2 of them. And these lecture series would be a place where we would bring people together to think deeply, bring people together to wrestle with books and other things that have been written. One of the things we've said in the moral fusion movement, the Forward Together movement, is the worst thing you can do is be loud and wrong. And so we like to we don't separate the academy from the activism. We think that is a false dichotomy and should never be separated. And so I won't introduce who is going to lead us tonight, but what I am going to do is introduce us to the namesakes of this lecture. We decided when this center came here that we wanted to name each thing that we did after people who have done it, people who have been in the trenches. And I'm not going to give a full, broad, long rendition of their resumes, but to say a couple of things very significantly and why this is the Pelles, McSurely, and Eguavoen Lecture series, and shall be henceforth and forever. Al McSurely, where's Al? Right there. is a nationally recognized civil rights lawyer. Went back to law school at 50. What you should know and why we recognize him tonight with this lecture series in his namesake is because he did work in Kentucky to organize black and white folk, to bring East Kentucky and Louisville together. There were forces that saw what his work as being so dangerous that for doing that work of bringing people together, they charged him with sedation and attempted to convict him, put him in jail. They also blew up his house, talk about housing, from under him and his wife, because they dared to bring black and white people into the same house, into the same space in Kentucky. His work continues to live. He was awarded some years ago by the NAACP as a National Civil Rights Lawyer of the Year. I can't tell you the number of cases Al has taken when nobody else would. I know I've been arrested at least 18 times, and he's been there every time. But he is a tactician when it comes to movement and movement building. And Al, we wanted tonight, for the first lecture series that the center would have, is to make sure that your name was placed alongside this center. And I won't read each one of them, I'll read this one. It says, this certificate is proudly presented to Al McSurely in recognition of his outstanding contribution, lasting legacy of excellence, dedication, and inspiration, and as a tribute to his remarkable achievements and unwavering commitment, the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at Yale is honored to establish the Pelles McSurely Eguavoen Lecture Series. This lecture series will serve as a lasting testament to his influence, fostering learning and discourse for generations to come. Alinda, you wanna, how you all wanna? Uh-oh, he wants to come on together. All right, give it up. We'll make sure that this is listed on all of our things, and you'll have a remark at the end. Somebody say Al McSurely. Yeah, Al and McSurely. The next young lady, that's right. She liked when I say that. And Carolyn Foster, where's Carolyn Foster, who's here with us from Alabama? Her and Nancy were pulled in by Roz to work with our intern program. Roz Pelles I equate her to the modern day Ella Baker, and then some. She went to college in North Carolina, went to law school at Howard, has spent her entire life in movement building, labor movements. There's not a major movement in this country that has happened since the late 50s, early 60s that Roz Pelles hasn't in some way had something to do. Somewhere her handprint, her thinking, her pushing for us not to just lift up protest signs, but to first do an analysis, understand the political moment that you're in, and then do heavy thinking around what meets this particular moment, as opposed to just picking up doing the same thing over and over again. What meets this moment? And she has brought that into this movement. She is a sister beloved for me in particular. She gathers us, she pushes us. She served as years of the leading civil rights lawyer for the AFL-CIO, the entire AFL-CIO, which is powerful and significant in and of itself. She has been at the heart and the pulse of both pushing the labor movement and critiquing the labor movement. She's been at the center of persons who ran for president before we even had, say, a Barack Obama, in the early days when the Jackson campaign was envisioned and when Rainbow Push was envisioned. And I could go on and on and on. And she is willing to come out of retirement sometimes to engage. We called her out of retirement in 2013 to serve with us in building out the Moral Monday movement, which if it wasn't for Ross Pelles, I suspect the Moral Monday movement would not have been as sustained as it was. Give you a quick thing and I'll move on. We were in the middle of the Moral Monday movement. People getting arrested. I mean, we'd had something like 700 people had already gotten arrested. Every week, thousands of people were coming, and I got a call from Ross Pelles, and this is what I mean, but the gift. She says, Reverend Barber, you have to leave. I said, leave where? She said, you have to leave the movement. We have to gather 10 or 15 people, and we've got to go to Highlander. And I said, Ross, but people are going to be here Monday, and folk are coming. And she said, and if you can't be away a day, then it's not a movement. But the movement is not where it was when it started in April. We are now past that, and we have to understand the movement now. What has happened? What has changed? We've got to wrestle with that reality, right? And she pulled us away, took us to Highlander for 3 days. And surely some people did some strange things because you know when you're gone, folk who want the headline but they don't want the headaches, they come alive. People who just want to jump in front of the camera, they come alive. People who want to try to act like they're the leader of the movement or whatever, they come alive. And things happen. But as she said, the movement held because we had a strong foundation of why. But you should also know, finally, that early on, the forces of evil tried to take Roz out. In 1973, 79, on camera, in a collusion with the some of the members of the Greensboro Police Department and the KKK, as they were leading people from a housing project, where one of their fights was about housing. The Klan was allowed to come in and allowed to cut, stab, and shoot those that she was marching and leading with. Her husband was shot in the back with a shotgun, and he survived and lived, but 5 people didn't. One of them was the student government president at Bennett College. Another one was a doctor, and so forth and so on. A man that we just laid to rest this past Saturday was stabbed, Nelson Johnson. And yet, she came through that experience, I think, committed in a way to truth and love and justice that is phenomenal, because she could have lived forever with bitterness and hatefulness and just walked away. She had the tools of academia to do something else, but she had the heart of a lover of people that wouldn't allow her to do anything else, but continue to ask the question, where are we now? And what is it that we're called to do? She has been serving as a member of the team here at Yale. She is retiring, I think, from here. She's going to be doing some thinking and writing, and her last days are now, we're in the throes of them, February to March, we'll see. But anyway, and but she formally has turned in, but we're so thankful for all that she's done, and we want to honor this McSurely Pelles Eguavoen Lecture Series, and Ross Pelles is here with us tonight. Would you?
Thank you so much.
And each of them are going to have some remarks at the end of this. That's right. All right. The last young lady is, I think she's in Nigeria right now. She's not with us, but she was the first assistant director for the center, Valerie Eguavoen. And Valerie, hey, we love you. But what you should know about Valerie is I met Valerie when we were in the middle of the North Carolina NAACP versus McCory case, the voting rights case that challenged the worst voting suppression case post the Shelby decision. Post the Shelby decision, it was the absolute worst. It was the case that was supposed to turn everything around. And they filed it, and within a few minutes of them filing it, we filed our case. And Valerie Eguavoen was a young lawyer from Howard, and she was a researcher on that team. And my God, did she research? Did she find things? Did she make sure that the lawyers had what they needed? And we took on the state of North Carolina. They had $6 million, Brother Forman. We had pro bono lawyers. They had an all-white male group of folk. We had a diverse group of people. They said we couldn't win. The Justice Department asked us to back off some of what we were pushing because we wanted to go after intentional discrimination and so forth and so on. They kind of wanted us to pull back. The movement said no. Valerie was in the trenches. I mean, some days working 16 hours a day as a young lawyer, not getting the glory, not up there at the front, not arguing the case, but making sure that the lawyers had what they needed to argue the case. And when the dust cleared, we won that case. The Fourth Circuit said that the North Carolina legislative body had engaged in racism with surgical intent, and that they had created a legislature that was unconstitutionally constituted. And we won that case. And it went to the Supreme Court, the Roberts Supreme Court. And the case was so strong that they didn't even touch it. They said, "I'm not touching this." And it set the model. And in fact, Attorney Elias, what's his name, Rob? Mark Elias said that case changed the way he approached voting rights cases, because normally what you do is go out and get all black plaintiffs. But Valerie was a part of the team that went out and found black plaintiffs, white women, farmers, churches, pastors, veterans, all of this diversity, and help do the research to show not only the racism toward black people, but the collateral damage that it was causing for all people, and why even white people had standing in the case. And she helped us argue that voter suppression creates an impoverished democracy. And we won. She's not with us tonight. I think she's in Nigeria. She's planning on going back, doing some PhD work. She is a lawyer from Howard, but I think she's planning on going back and get some PhD. But we want to honor Valerie Eguavoen, who's the youngest member of this team. And I said, thank goodness. And so if y'all give her a hand. So we're so happy tonight, and I'm going to now do the job I'm supposed to do at this point, and that is turn this mic over to Jonathan Hartgrove, and he'll tell you what he wants to about himself, but then move us forward in this lecture series.
I want to introduce a conversation that I'm so glad you all are here to be part of. You have in your hand, if you got here early enough, and if you didn't, please stop by the table after we're done, but you have in your hand a book called Plundered. And we have with us this evening a legal scholar, an activist, and the author of this book, Bernadette Atuahene. So glad you're here. And I want to invite you to just come on up and be right here at the center, because she's going to, in her own way, introduce the argument of this book. And then I want to introduce a couple more people, and I'm going to get out of the way so there can be a conversation. She brought with her, let me introduce Alexandra Nichols, who's come all the way from Detroit. Give her a hand. She made that journey. Alex, would you come sit right here? And she will share about her own understanding of this issue from personal experience. And then we are also very glad to have our colleague from the law school, also a long time in the movement and a scholar and author and many things, but for this panel, somebody who's going to help have this conversation, help us have this conversation about the intersection between an issue of law and this issue of public theology and policy that Reverend Barber has been referencing. So please welcome James Forman. And I'm going to hand this over to you.
Let me have that water, Jonathan, the other one. Yep. The half open. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming to this event. So before getting to the book, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background and how I came to this work. So my parents immigrated to America from Ghana in West Africa. And when I was a child, I knew I had 4 career options and 4 career options only. I could be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a disgrace to the entire family. Ooh. I was bad at math, so engineering was a no-go. The thought of even dissecting cadavers just makes me want to barf, so being a doctor wasn't in the cards. And since I did not want to be a disgrace, my only option was the law.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't want to be any old lawyer. Ever since I enrolled at UCLA for undergrad, I knew I wanted to be a change maker protecting intergenerational wealth in my community. And when I commit to something, y'all, I am all in. I worked myself to the bone, made it to Yale Law School and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government for my graduate studies, and I eventually became a law professor. And now 100% of my research, my writing, my advocacy deals with land stolen from Black people. So I do ethnography, so I live and immerse myself in the place I study. And my first ethnographic project was studying land stolen in South Africa during apartheid and colonialism. My first book, We Want What's Ours, Learning from South Africa's Land Restitution Program, examined the psychological, political, economic, and social consequences of getting land or money back. The book was a huge success. At the official book launch, the Deputy Land Claims Commissioner himself came to the book launch and publicly declared that the commission planned to adopt 90% of the book's recommendations. So that first book project, although wildly successful, it was really uncomfortable for me in lots of ways because it looked at Black people as victims, Black people being stolen from. So in my next ethnographic project, I wanted to focus on Black agency. And so I decided I wanted to focus on squatting because that's when vulnerable populations are taking land instead of being taken from. And Detroit has one of the largest squatting phenomenon in modern US history. So I applied for a big National Science Foundation grant and I got it, and so that's how I actually ended up in Detroit. A squatter is someone who occupies a property without the permission of the record owner. And there are 2 types of squatters in the law, a takeover and a holdover. A takeover is what most people think of as a squatter, someone who comes onto a property without any prior legal relationship to it. But then a holdover, I teach property to first-year law students, that's when someone has a legal relationship and they fall out of it in some way. And so, for instance, they were a tenant or an owner and somehow fell out of that legal relationship. So when I began interviewing the holdovers in Detroit, one person after the other told me that they were the owner and they got tax foreclosed, but then they stayed waiting for the new owner to arrive. Now at that point, as a property professor, I knew quite a bit about mortgage foreclosure, but I knew very little about tax foreclosure. So I had to really start doing my homework. And I soon discovered that in Detroit, since 2009, 1 in 3 homes has completed the property tax foreclosure process. 1 in 3. We haven't seen this number of property tax foreclosures in American history since the Great Depression. So given the gravity of the situation, I had to switch my focus from studying squatting to study tax foreclosure, because when you do ethnography, it's not theoretical. These are my actual neighbors who are losing their homes right before my very eyes. So I've lived in Detroit on the east side since 2017, trying to understand Detroit's property tax foreclosure crisis from those I live beside. So Myrisha Brown is one of more than 150 homeowners who I've interviewed for my study. She's a petite brown-skinned woman with this super cute pixie cut. And hers is one of the many stories I tell in my book, Plundered, How Racist Policies Undermine Black Home Ownership in America. So one cold winter day, Myrisha and I returned to the family home on Bayless Street that she lost through tax foreclosure. And as we walked towards the house, Myrisha was like, man, Professor, I haven't been back here since my kids and I were evicted several years back. And as soon as we stepped into the yard, we both noticed that the home was vacant. And for Myrisha, this was a complete and total gut punch because she had worked so hard to make sure that the house did not become a vacant, blighted structure like many of the homes on the block and in the city of Detroit. So as we slowly walked around the perimeter of the house, she pointed out all the places she had told me about in the multiple interviews we had conducted throughout the years. She said, this right here, this is a spot where the garage used to be. A fire that started next door burned it down. She said, this right here, this is where my granddad's beloved apple tree used to be. He used to, when he died, it died, and it eventually got cut down. As we moved from the back of the home to the side of the home, I noticed she stopped and then she peered through the side window to look in the living room where her grandmother, who lived to age 102, spent her last days. When I saw Myrisha's face turn ashen, I immediately ran over to her to figure out what in the world was going on. We both could not believe our eyes. The pipes had burst and and the water had frozen, covering the living room in at least a foot of ice. Myrisha just wailed, and all I could do is just stand there and hold her and cry with her. This home on Bayless Street meant so much to Myrisha because her grandparents fought hell and high water to acquire it. They had to, despite racial covenants, redlining, blockbusting, urban renewal, and other racist policies, in their retirement, Myrisha's grandparents finally were able to purchase the home. And it was without a doubt their dream home. And it was in fact in an area that racial covenants in prior years prevented African Americans from inhabiting, but once whites left to the suburbs, blacks actually moved into that neighborhood. The home on Bayless Street was the only asset that Myrisha's grandparents had to pass down. But by the time Myrisha's grandparents passed away, no other family member even wanted the home because it wasn't an asset, it was a money pit. The home had broken windows covered with plastic to keep the elements out. There was no functioning shower or bath, and plaster was falling from the ceiling. The other homes on the block were in equally bad shape. So when historic and modern day redlining cut off funds for home improvement, this type of blight, you need to realize, is the inevitable result. Given the poor shape of the Bayless home, the real question is why in the world was Myrisha so eager to inherit her grandparents' home and so committed to rehabilitating it when no other family member wanted anything to do with the home? When I interviewed Myrisha for the first time, she really gave me some insight into her life, and this quandary became clear. As the oldest child and a woman, she carried back-breaking caretaking responsibilities on her very narrow shoulders. Myrisha told me that not only did she care for her own 2 children, but she had to care for their father, who was in a wheelchair as a result of a carjacking. She told me she had to care for her sister, who had a debilitating autoimmune disease, along with that sister's child. Myrisha also had to care for another sister who had irreversible brain damage, and that sister's young son. Because of our nation's poorest social safety net, women like Myrisha are forced to fill the gaps at great cost to themselves. After spending time with Myrisha, it became clear to me why she couldn't abandon her grandparents' home on Bayless Street. Under no circumstances does Myrisha dodge or evade her family responsibilities. No matter how daunting, she takes them head on. So rehabilitating her grandparents' home was not something she wanted to do, it's something she had to do. Some of Myrisha's most precious memories were in the Bayless Street home. She said to me, I remember scooping up the apples that my grandfather shook down from the apple tree. Those were some of the juiciest green apples in the entire city of Detroit. Above all, Myrisha she rides for her city. She is so proud of her city and so committed to her city. And she did not want her home to become a vacant eyesore like so many of the other homes in Detroit, contributing to the story of the city's demise instead of its revival. So that's why that day that we went back to the home and saw the living room covered in at least a foot of ice, Myrisha felt like a complete and total failure. But what I need you all to understand is Myrisha failed because individual efforts are no match for broken systems.
That's right, that's right.
Let me say that again.
Say that.
Myrisha failed because individual efforts are no match for broken systems. The saga started when Myrisha found a yellow bag on her porch. It looked like just like the yellow bag on the book cover here. And when she opened the bag, she found a legal notice informing her that the property tax foreclosure process had begun, and if she didn't pay her property tax debt by March 31st of the following year, Wayne County would sell her home at its tax foreclosure auction. As she read the note, she was flooded with emotion. She felt scared, she felt anxious, she felt depressed, but most of all, y'all, she felt shame. She was ashamed because the yellow bag announced to the entire neighborhood that she was about to lose her grandparents' home because she was behind in property taxes. But when she looked up, surprisingly, she saw these yellow bags on almost every home on the block. So at that point, she knew something was up, but she didn't know exactly what was going on. And when I first met Myrisha, she was really blaming herself for what happened. She said, "You know what, Professor? I just wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing." And most city officials that I interviewed also had these narratives of what I call personal irresponsibility. For instance, one city official told me, "Well, Professor, the problem is Detroiters, they just don't want to pay their taxes." Another told me, "Professor, the problem is Detroiters bought houses they couldn't afford." And one city official, I'm gonna name him, Dave Szymanski, okay? He had the audacity to tell me, well, when they had a choice between buying a purse and paying their taxes, unfortunately, they decided to buy purses. But my research tells a different story. It's not a story of personal irresponsibility, it's a story of structural injustice. In researching this book, I have interviewed hundreds of homeowners, government officials, and investors. I have combed through reams and reams of property tax assessment data. I even took a 9-month course and passed the state exam to become a certified Michigan property tax assessor. I told you, when I'm all in, y'all, I don't play. Now, through my comprehensive investigation, I found that between 2009 and 2015, in each of those 7 years, the city of Detroit overtaxed between 53% and 85% of homes in violation of the Michigan State Constitution, which quite clearly says no property can be assessed at more than 50% of the property's market value. And it wasn't just my study. The Detroit News came behind me and did an expose, and they found that the city of Detroit overtaxed its homeowners by at least $600 million. Since over 30% of Detroiters live below the poverty line, many homeowners didn't have the money to pay these illegally inflated property taxes. And what's worse is many of them weren't even supposed to be paying these property taxes in the first place. Because in Michigan, when you live below the poverty line, you qualify for a property tax exemption. But because the city of Detroit made this entitlement so difficult for people to acquire, many people lost their homes due to illegally inflated property taxes that they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place. So it's no wonder when Myrisha looked up, she saw yellow bags on almost every single door. My God, my God. So when the local government takes a home because of a family fails to pay property taxes, it doesn't just take bricks and mortar, y'all. It takes intergenerational wealth. It takes priceless memories. Through the chaos of evictions, families lose precious photos. They lose grandmama's quilts. They lose those hype marks that we etch into the door to mark our children's growth. They're separated from longtime neighbors who've become family. I need you to understand that through tax foreclosure, people lose so much. Because most tax foreclosed homes had been inherited and were fully paid off, homeowners blamed themselves for losing mama's house, for losing granddaddy's house. Because if the home had a mortgage on it, the bank would take it before the government could. So during the interviews I conducted of tax foreclosed homeowners, I can't tell you how much self-lambasting, and shame that I heard during these interviews. So much so, you know, I had to call people back after the interview because I'm a mess. I'm an empath. So if you start crying during an interview, honey, I'm gonna be crying with you. And I'm gonna be not just a little tear, I'm gonna be ugly crying. And so after the interview, I had to stop and not to mess up my data. I called many people back and I said, you know what, my sister? You know what, my brother? This is not your fault. In these complex property calculations, there was an injustice. These racist policies had you out here trying to slay a dragon with a butter knife. So according to my dear brother Ibram Kendi, who has really influenced my work on all of this, he defines racist policies as written and unwritten laws and processes that produce or sustain racial inequity. So the way property taxes are administered in Wayne County undoubtedly qualifies. Wayne County has 43 municipalities. 33 have a supermajority of white people, 70% or more, and 3 have a supermajority of black people, Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park. And my research found that the majority black cities are being overtaxed and foreclosed on at a much greater rate than the majority white cities. This is racial injustice. But this injustice, I need you all to understand, is not at all exclusively a Detroit problem. Detroit is really ground zero for a national problem. The most recent national study shows that blacks and Hispanics pay on average a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate than whites for the same bundle of goods, which equals on average about $300 to $400 more per year. So racialized property tax administration is a national problem that our nation has not yet begun to address. And more importantly, this is a quintessential example of what I call in my book predatory governance. This is when local governments intentionally or unintentionally raise public dollars through racist policies. We've seen predatory governance in Ferguson, Missouri. Beyond what happened to our precious brother, Michael Brown, there is an excellent DOJ report, and if you haven't read it, you should go read it. And it documents how the city of Ferguson engaged in unconstitutional policing, subjecting African Americans to excessive fees and fines. Who benefited financially? Not any corrupt police officer, but the city of Ferguson itself. Predatory governance is what's happening in Detroit and many other cities where the local governments are inflating the property taxes of black and brown homeowners. Who's financially benefiting? Not some corrupt public official, but the public coffers. So the good news is, just as Detroit is ground zero for this national problem, Detroit is also the epicenter for the resistance. Because I always say the people who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solutions. So once my research exposed the structural problems, this information really lifted the shame and allowed homeowners to stop beating themselves up and made room for righteous indignation so the fight back could begin. And in 2017, my students and I joined with over a dozen grassroots organizations to create something called the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. And we have 3 goals and 3 goals only. The first goal is to stop these illegally inflated property taxes, not just in Detroit, but nationally. Our second goal is to stop the ongoing foreclosures in Detroit until we can make sure that when people are foreclosed, they're foreclosed because the amount they actually had to pay and not these inflated amounts. And our third and final goal is to provide compensation. So before I went to law school, I was a community organizer in South Central LA. So when I got these results, we got to work organizing. And by building community power, we are able to secure several significant wins. As a group, we have halted roughly 13,000 tax foreclosures by pressuring Wayne County's treasurer to place a moratorium on owner-occupied homes in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. We're working on 2025 as we speak. We've helped over 1,000 Detroit homeowners successfully apply for a total of $4.4 million in federal ARPA funding to pay their illegally inflated property tax debt. We've appealed the inflated property tax assessments for 1,000 Detroit homeowners free of charge, and we've even secured $6 million from the city of Detroit for compensation. Most importantly, through the Dignity Restoration Project, we're raising $10 million to compensate people like Myrisha, who lost their homes because of tax foreclosure due to illegally inflated property taxes that they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place.
Can you do that list again? I want all the students so we make sure we write that down. the victories. I want y'all to hear what this combination of students and professor and impacted people. Give me that list one more time.
Yes. We've halted roughly 13,000 tax foreclosures by pressuring the Wayne County Treasurer to place a moratorium on owner-occupied homes.
Okay.
We helped over 1,000 Detroit homeowners successfully apply for a total of $4.4 million in federal ARPA funding to pay their illegally inflated property tax debt. Mm-hmm. We've appealed the inflated property tax assessments for over 1,000 Detroit homeowners. And we have secured $6 million for the city of Detroit for compensation. Mm-hmm. So if you all are interested in the compensation, you can go to Dignity Restoration. You can go to dignityrestorationproject.org to donate. Again, dignityrestorationproject.org to donate. So to conclude, I'm glad that I did not become an engineer. I'm glad that I didn't become a doctor. I'm glad that I did become a lawyer fighting against the theft of black homes and fighting to protect our intergenerational wealth and dignity. Both of my parents have gone on to glory, but I know they're smiling down on me because somehow, some way, I have managed not to disgrace them. More importantly and more seriously, people in Detroit and throughout the country who are filled with shame because they're fighting a losing battle against racist policies, they are not a disgrace either.
No.
I'm going to ask a few questions, but before we get into that, I want to have Alex share her story as well.
I'm a Detroiter. I'm a Piston. I'm a Lion. Okay, I don't play in a team, but I'm one. Okay, I'm a Red Wing. That's what we say. Okay, but it's hard to keep that feeling when you know a Detroit that's better than what the professor just outlined that we've been through. And one of the things I always say at our coalition meetings is what happened to us during this illegal taxation, overtaxation, it's not the Detroit I know. Mm-hmm. It's not the Detroit I grew up in. It's not the Detroit I know. It's so strange that neighbors are going through these things and the city government is not fighting for them. That's the part that I felt so perplexed about because my father worked for the city of Detroit as a sanitation worker all of my life. My mom was a school teacher. I saw them deal with lots of things at the kitchen table. I mean, I heard the morning news, the Sunday news, I heard it all. But I also heard solutions. I also saw, you know, a lot of my family members working to solve these things. And when things got hard, it just didn't overtake the city like that. That's the part that perplexes me still. And it made me look at my Detroiters different. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like to look at them like that. And we had an emergency manager and things like that, but still, the people looked like me that was running the city. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't put that together. Coming back from graduate school and having an internship in California, and my mom passed and my name was on the deed. The professor was speaking about Myrisha, and I got emotional, but it's similar to what she shared about her, but my mom passed and I was in my last year of grad school, and thank God we did the paperwork, and it was always my mother and father's want to have me have the home. I'm the youngest of their 10 children. And so they sent us all to college. So coming back and being in California, I had a neighbor, right? Family, looking after my home. And so she called in 2014, Alex, you've got this yellow sticker on your door. I said, okay. So I called the Wayne County's office, get everything set up, payment plan, this and that. And in the payment plan, and as I'm moving through my career in Los Angeles, I injured myself, so I was on disability, so I wasn't able to keep up with my payments. But again, after I got on the payment plan, they put another note on the door. My neighbor called and told me it's another note on the door, and I called the offices again, and they said, well, at this point, I can recommend you to contact this nonprofit organization who helps Detroiters bid for their homes back with the regular county system. They've been doing this process for years. So it was a process that I felt confident about. And so I got some funds together for them to send to them. I had my sister in town in Detroit who went to the offices as a proxy for me. And we did the three-way call, had a contract for them to represent me and the property and getting it back. And so that process had to be taken care of by October. So sent the information in, calling, checking up November, calling, checking up December. Of course, it's holiday time, first of the year, calling, checking on everything. And now what's your address again? Your home is in the Michigan Land Bank. Oh, Michigan Land Bank. What's their number? Let me get them a call because I have an exemption. I'm a grad student. I have this organization helping me get my home back. Everything. Okay, so I'm calling around. Oh, ma'am, there's no Michigan Land Bank. They said there's no Michigan Land Bank. Oh, it must be the Detroit Land Bank, newly formed. Okay, well, let's get them on the line. I have all my paperwork. I have an exemption. I'm under this. I have disability. I'm a grad student internship. This is, and, oh, ma'am, your address, what is it again? Your property is on a list on a blight bundle. Blight bundle. An investor came through and made a pledge to purchase these 300 sheets of papers.
Before it even went to the auction.
Before it even went to the auction. So my home was set aside prior to, and with our coalition, we have all these organizations working with us, and come to find out, one of the people in this nonprofit that I have given the money to begin the bidding process had been withholding, an executive that they brought in from wherever had been holding properties for their friends. Of course, I didn't know anything about this. Went down to that office multiple times, name on the list, Land Bank, the same thing, Wayne County Treasurer's Office, same thing. You guys have made a mistake, until I realized I was giving them ammunition against me.
Wow.
And I just kept seeking and searching and searching and seeking. I was like, how is this even, they have all of this. This is where this is not the Detroit no feeling kept heavily weighing on me. And I felt defeated. I felt like a failure. I felt like I let all my brothers and sisters down. I felt like I let my parents down. And, you know, my dad had a 6th grade education and was able to do this. And here we are. I'm wandering around Detroit. I mean, I had brothers and sisters renting rooms here, renting rooms there. I have a house. Why would I be, looking for another house? This is my home. Right. So when I came to Detroit, back to Detroit, to reclaim my home, to confront the nonprofit organization, to do this and do that, they had changed the locks on my home. And I'm just out of a home. Now, this home is in a historic district, all brick, 4 bedrooms, 4 baths. it's just in a neighborhood where folks kept things up. But here I am looking and searching for, I said, how could this? Called the mayor's office. Did this, did that. Every organization you think you should do. No, I was in grad school. I'm navigating this and having a problem. Can you imagine the folks who just got a high school degree or no education or whatever it is? They should be able to navigate. That's what I'm saying. This is not the Detroit I know. Somebody with the 6th grade education could still go to the city of Detroit and get some remedy. But I just kept on, kept keeping on. I said, it's got to be something. There's got to be something. I contacted CIO. They said, well, they handled some cases, but I was on the tail end of that. They went on past it. So I just kept going. Was
it ACLU or AFL? ACLU.
ACLU.
Right, that's right. What was your major, by the way, at school?
Filmmaking.
Okay.
And thank God, well, my mom passed 4 months before, but I was able to win Best Screenplay, Best Film, leaving San Francisco, and thank God I was able to get that glory for her. I did a short film on her last summer of sharecropping with my great-grandmother, of which my great-grandmother, and I guess that's the courage I have today, stood up to a racist landowner and told them they didn't have no money coming that summer. And when she talked back to him, he stepped forward like he was going to strike her. But she reached in her bosom and said, the next step you take will be a step to hell. And that was the name of my movie. But and Reverend Barber, you know my sister, Joanne Watson.
Yeah.
She passed in '03, but she wrote the book, Step to Hell, The Courage of My Great-Grandmother. But I did the film, and thank God. But aside from that, I just kept pushing on and pushing on. I finally called Southwest Detroit, organization of some sort. Related to housing. I didn't know what could happen. I was trying to get a loan to do this and do that and everything I tried to do. But a person who had been working with the professor
That's right.
got a hold of my information. I thought I was the only one going through this. I did. I thought I was the only one going through this. I'd come back from living in California for about 20 years, and it's 2015, and it's 2025 now. They took it off, put it back on, sold it, but all this while they had all the information about me. So they had it on in 15, took it off, put it back on in 16. They thought I gave up, but I did not. And Erin called me, and she says, well, I heard that you were having some problems with this and that. I said, you did? It just, that day, I remember sitting by the window, and the sun was shining, and I just felt the world lift off of me, because she told me it happened to her, Erin. She's a young lady with our organization. She told me about her story, and she says, there's a lot of us. And we meet with the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. I said, where's this meeting? Where is it? I gotta go. But let me tell you, going to the meetings every first Saturday of every month, it's just maybe last fall, maybe summer, I was able to tell my story without crying. And I felt the growth. And when I was talking to Professor, I said, Professor, I'm not crying. She's like, Alex, it's happening. It's gonna be all right. It's not your fault. And I just felt such grief for the property. I just felt so low.
That's a concept you said. I want folks to hear that. You said grief for the property.
Yeah.
So then in a real sense, the property was not just bricks and mortar. The property had a life. It had stories. And the property was groaning. And I would just ask the theological students here, the biblical students, how in biblical texts, theology and public policy, could you talk about what she just said, the house groaning? What text comes to mind? Anybody? The stone shall cry out. What other? The earth groans. Huh? The earth groans. The year? The earth groans. The earth groans, right. The New Testament, where Paul talks about there's an embodiment of the earth, and that when injustice and wrong is going on, literally there is a groaning. There is a groaning. Because as she's telling the story, I'm listening theologically for how a group of ministers could engage. Now, we know they could engage just because injustice, but from the standpoint of Christian biblicism and theology, what could be the foundation? And I thought about when you said something that I hope the students picked up on. She said, when I become involved, I live among the people. I live among the people. What, for those of students, what two theological, biblical pictures does that bring to mind on an issue that you might, if you were talking about this as a pastor, you're preaching to your congregation, you're trying to get the church involved, what passages could you use to say, church, this is why we must be involved in this? And for lack of time, Ezekiel, God's instruction was what? Go first and live among the people. So in a very sense, you actually were, what you said to us in doing this work, you embodied the theological framework of embodied presence. That you didn't just go talking. You didn't just see one case and do. Ezekiel was told, go and live among the people for 7 days. Go there completely. Don't speak first. Go and be a part of the community. And so allow your research and your activism to come out of that. And then for us as Christians, the word became flesh and dwelt, tabernacled.
Yes.
Right? Because as students in public theology, it's not just knowing it's wrong, but how do we engage it? How do we bring our biblical understanding, our theological understanding along with us? Because we can't just do it because it's something to be done as members of the church. So here, though they did not use that framing, our professor, in fact, she is speaking in very theological terms for us. Embodied presence. You know, the theology of being embodied. And then you said something about you thought you were alone, but then you found out there are a lot of us. And something happened. When you found out that there was a lot of us, you said the weight lifted. Well, in a sense, as a student of the scriptures, weight lifts when God is present. God is present when 2 or 3 gather in God's name. Amen. So in the process of bringing people together, they can move from victims to fighters. They can move because they can do in the community, and it may not be 1 million, but 2 or 3 can have. There's a scripture that says 1 can chase 1,000, but 2 can put 10,000 to flight. You hear me, students? This is why we must know. And where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, what is my name? Character, my name, love and justice and truth. So part of, if we were talking about this, why would we bring this to a center for public theology, right? Why would we do a combination with the law school? Because when we read the book and heard the processes actually line up with many of the scriptural, biblical, theological unctions and directions that we are given. There's this great story of in Kings, the 4 lepers, and they were in the middle of depression and hurting, and they said, well, we could sit here and die, or we could unite and go to the city. So you unite and went to the city, and it was in the uniting of people and going to the city that transformation occurred, because shame one goal of shame is to isolate you. We all can be guilty, but shame is a different matter. Part of the goal of shame is to beat you down and isolate you and strip you. So part of theology, active in public policy, is to do exactly what she's done. So in fact, we can learn a theological lesson from this lawyer who has come to present tonight, because in many ways, while you may not frame it like this, for us, your work, your testimony, your talking about this, your tenacity, I see in you the woman who kept knocking at the king's door in the New Testament and wouldn't stop. Just, I'm gonna get it, and after a while gets an answer, which Jesus was telling as a story to inform the Christian community how tenacious you have to be in the pursuit of justice. That it's not one prayer or one sermon, but there has to be a tenacity, right? And so here you are acting out in this. So I just want to say, as I'm sitting here, and if I was teaching, why if churches are in community in Detroit and they are not involved in this particular issue, why that's a form of theological malpractice. And the reason I can't just say that, I would say it because the way in which you all have engaged this work is in line with the kind of Christian theological motivation, and it's not just taking action, it's how you act in the action taking, right? And I wanted to ask one question. I'm gonna turn, because my brother, because this is something that, two questions, and you can answer them anyway. Does this case in any way because Jesus was first, there was an attempt to kill him first, was his home people. It wasn't some outsiders. Is this case in any way reflective of how the systems of racism, or and by racism, I'm talking about what you mean structural racism that has a disparate impact on communities. I'm not just talking about somebody calling you the N-word. I'm talking about structural reality. Because I'm wrestling with a black city, but this is happening to black folk. And is there somewhere for a discussion of how black power, if not appropriated properly, can in fact be an enablement of racist policy? That's a serious indictment. That this is not coming from a majority white population of politicians. The second thing is and if you have any words on it, is who else got paid? Because I was going to ask you, I know the city coffers, but then she spoke a truth that came out that people were actually using this, and I'm going to ask, was the guy that was saving it for his friends, did he look like?
They were white.
They were white, but somebody had to know.
Somebody knew.
And so there's this mix, it's complicated, if you will. In other words, you can't just easily point it out and say, white folk did this. One thing that Al taught me is that you can't do that when you're talking about racism, just point based on color. The racial disparate impact can come from many places at the same time. Am I right on that?
I'll say something about that, which is, in my work, I talk about racist policies. I don't talk about systemic racism. I don't talk about structural racism. Why? Because systemic racism, structural racism is so big. What do you do about it? It's debilitating. It's disempowering. But when you talk about racist policies, number one, it's language everybody can understand.
Gotcha.
Number two, it moves us away from notions of intent. What we need to figure out, racist policy is any policy, procedure, practice that produces racial inequity. That's whether the inequity exists or not is all that matters. right? We don't care what you meant to do or who meant to do it or what color you are.
Right.
All we care is that this policy, practice, or procedure is producing racial inequity. And that's the other good thing, again, about this move, and again, this is a move Ibram Kendi made, and he convinced me, which is then, when you talk about racist policies, it forces a person articulating this argument to enumerate the actual policies underlying the racial inequity. In my case, it's that the city of Detroit is overtaxing the lower valued homes. It's that an 18% interest penalty is added to any property tax debt, as if the problem is you have the money but don't want to pay it, right? An 18% interest penalty is just, if you're poor and don't have it, that's just making it worse. But in the book, I enumerate the policies, and that's the beauty, because now when you call it racist policies and you're enumerating all the policies that are involved in that racial inequity, now we can begin the work of disassembling those policies.
Right.
It's about going from general structural racism, systemic racism, to the very specific, identifying the racial inequity and the policies that led to it. And once you call out those policies, we can all start doing the work of disassembling them.
The policy, right. Yeah. And for those of you that are students in Christian theology, if you notice, like even in Jesus' first sermon, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor, which, and you go down, he's naming policies, if you will. He's naming actual realities in people's lives and how the Spirit of God puts us contrary to those things. And it's not about whether or not it coming from Herod, coming from Caesar, coming from whoever. It's the fact that they exist. Now, that does not mean we dismiss the human actor, but it means that what we can hold folk accountable based on the policy. And I know in our movement, when we talk about racism, we always say we're talking about policy racism. We're not talking about, do they, as Ibram Kendi said, does somebody dislike you because of the color of the skin? That's not where we're at. That's not, we want, whether they like you or not, the issue is this policy doesn't like you. And if they are, and you can wrestle with whether they like you and all of that, what we're going to wrestle with is getting this policy shifted. Because the policy is, in fact, has racist impact.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any policy that produces racial inequality is a racist policy.
Gotcha.
And it doesn't matter if it's a black person, white person, yellow, whoever. The only thing that matters is if this particular policy is producing racial inequity.
Dr. Forman, I'm going to, because of the time, I want to, and let's thank the courage of the testimony, this sister. And I hope you all notice how in movement building, you end up building family that you don't like. She said, my sister. It's like all of these connections began to happen as you're, we call it revolutionary love, as you're part of it. So, Dr. Forman.
Well, I know that we have a book signing scheduled, and I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to get their book signed. So I'm just going to offer a very, very, very brief comment, and then just ask one question, and then, which is, first of all, I want everybody to know kind of how deep this goes, and I want to, for me, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your work and your research, because if you look at any black family, it might be right now in the current generation, or it might be in previous generations, where a story like this will be told. My dad is black, my mom is white. I was listening to my father being interviewed, and it was like a recording that I had never heard it before. A lot of his interviews I had heard back from the civil rights movement, but this one I had never heard before. And he was just in a conversation, and he was mentioning, almost like as an aside, so he grew up in Mississippi and Chicago, and he was just mentioning as an aside, he said, well, when they took our land in LaFleur County. And he had never talked to me about that. He had never told me in all his life that our family, his family's land, had been taken. And he said a little bit more in that conversation about what happened, but we don't have very much to go on. But I just want to say that what I appreciate what you are doing now is you are making sure that, I mean, that was 70 years ago. You're making sure that today there isn't something happening where 70 years from now, the only thing your family has is a recording of you saying, oh yeah, you know, when they took our land in Detroit, right? So you are, in this moment, you are intervening to stop a justice from becoming what would just be a historical injustice if it were allowed to rest and to fester. So I really appreciate you doing that and your work. And the other thing that I want to say to Reverend Barber and to you as well is, you know, in the very beginning, Reverend, you said, well, you reject the divide between academia and activism. You said we don't live by that divide. Right. And all I want to say is tonight's program, you could not have picked a better way, a better book, and a better leader, because professor is a law professor. Right. But I just want to make sure you know, like 99% of the law professors that you might invite, we're not going to give a talk like that. And we're not going to be leading a movement like this. So well done on the invitation committee, well done for this lecture. I'm only going to ask just one question because I want to honor people's time, which is, it's a little bit of an extension of the question that Reverend Barber asked a minute ago when he was talking about the complexities of this issue, of this happening in a majority black community with a lot of black decision makers at some level, not exclusively for sure, because you're talking about the state of Michigan and Wayne County. It's complex, right? You got a lot of private interests, but at least at some level, right? There's a lot of city officials who ran on the notion that they were going to look out for somebody like you and your neighbors, and they are not doing that, right? I guess my question is, as you opened with a story of your first book in South Africa, and you said your book was a wild success, and you said at the launch, the minister of, I think it was, you said, land claims came and said, we're going to implement 90% of what's in your book. My question to you now is, what's happening? What's the reception in Detroit? What is the mayor or somebody else coming to your book launch in Detroit and saying, we're about to implement 90%?
Our eyes both went to the back of our head.
I take it that's a no.
Oh, yeah. If I wasn't in the divinity school, I probably would have said, hell no. But I'm here, so
we allow that at Yale.
But, you know, this, again, you know, as Reverend Barber was saying earlier, you know, the way we talk about race in America, we're all looking for the racist, okay? Hollywood has trained us. Black hats, white hats, good guys, bad guys.
That's right.
But, you know, we have to shift, and that's what I'm trying to do with this book, and this is a conversation I'm trying to start. We've got to shift away from that, from looking for the racist to focusing, again, getting from the generality to the specifics, right, about looking for policies that produce racial inequality. And you'll find lots of those, not only in Detroit, a majority black city run principally by black people, but you'll find that in lots of cities. But as long as but the way that American conceptions of race, we're obsessed with intent, right? If I sock Alex, I would never do that, right? The point is we stop talking about, did she mean to sock her? No, let's get some stitches for this sister, right? Let's fix her up. But instead, the way we talk about race, we're looking, did she mean to do it? And it's not just Hollywood, it's even our constitutional jurisprudence, ever since Washington v. Davis, right? We are upset. You can only get relief if you have the smoking gun, if you can prove intent. We're so obsessed with intent right? In the social, in the Hollywood, and then also in the constitutional jurisprudence, that we're missing the actual policies that are producing racial inequity. So how we have also, but we're moving forward nevertheless. And in Detroit, we passed 2 pieces of legislation. The first is there was a lawsuit to, I told you about the city of Detroit not making the poverty tax exemption accessible. Basically, there was a court settlement for that. They cleaned up their act. The court settlement only lasted 3 years. We came behind it through our councilwoman, Mary Sheffield, and made those changes permanent. That was the first piece of legislation we passed. Second piece of legislation we passed is, and you know, Alex is one of our leaders, and most of our leaders are just like Alex. They lost their homes as well. So it's, you know, it wasn't just we passed it. There was a lot of power building, a lot of organizing, a lot involved. So I'm talking about it, make it sound easy. The second thing we did is we most recently, last November, passed a property tax reform ordinance, where we really looked at why is this city overtaxing. You know, that's when I had to go take that class and humble myself and become a student again, and to become a certified Michigan assessor, so I could understand the system, so we could help collectively create this legislation to try and fix some of those problems. So we passed it. 3 years of organizing, we passed it. One of the main features of it is the city has to produce a study to determine if they are over-assessing people. That study was due last year, January. Do you think that study is done right now? Absolutely not. So now we're fighting to get the thing we passed, the historic piece of legislation, implemented. So, and again, and the mayor is white, but everybody else is black. So if you understand this as white and black, you're missing the whole thing, right? This is about, you know, this is really about, I don't know what it's about, actually.
Well, one of the things that it's about is that the phase 1 of what we're doing, working with the Dignity Restoration Project, is that we'll provide a $5,000 stipend to 2,000 families, to 2,000 of the families hardest hit by this illegal overtaxation. So this is phase 1. We're not just working to, when Reverend Barber stopped me when I said I grieved for my home, the dignity part. I felt like I let them down and my parents down. The shame that I'm bringing on my family. The shame that these other, and then the folks that have passed on that never gonna get any compensation through COVID and whatever natural means. But this Dignity Restoration Project, even though some may not get their homes back, we're still working to provide some compensation and working with these folks to let them know it wasn't them. That's what she said every first Saturday. And it dried my tears.
That's right.
It's not your fault.
That's right.
It's not your fault, Alex. Let me run the numbers. You were overtaxed. It's not your fault. Everybody that comes, she lets them know it's not your fault. And it dried my tears, and I started seeing it more and more. And every person that comes, we've got another program to help them out with. We've got another area to, you know, if they're in the family home and it's not in their name yet, somebody died, we help them get it in their name. We try and find out what they've been overtaxed. We try and find out the details so that people can feel whole and have dignity.
You know, when you say that, I hear those of your students of theology hear the scripture that says there's this great cloud of witnesses. And what I hear is a kind of a reverse speaking to them. You know, you're saying it's not your fault, it's not their fault, but that cloud of witnesses crying out, if you will, saying, don't let this pass. Don't let this pass, which is something that we are supposed to hear, particularly as clergy and students in ministry. I was thinking about also the fact, Dr. Forman, this is exactly, though, the kind of Bible studies we ought to be having in churches, where you bring scripture and policy together. I would imagine, you know, one of the things we teach in the movement that that a church, somebody leading a church, when they go there, the first thing they should do is draw a 5-mile radius around that church and ask what policies are impacting the people in this congregation. What policies? Because if you look at the life of Jesus, Jesus did ministries based on what he met in community. He didn't go out, like if he met somebody blind, he dealt with that. If he met with somebody that had an issue of blood, he dealt with that. It was what was embodied in the community was then the work. People are there, well, what should the church be doing? My question is, what's around it? Mm-hmm. What have you brought in the people that can tell you what's going on around it? What's the misery index? Because you have a responsibility to and even if the first step of the misery index is to recognize it and to help people know it's not on them and they're not alone. This is a critical piece. The last two things I want to mention is that the Fair Housing Law in 1968 was the last of the trilogy of laws. You had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Law that only got passed in the wake of Martin King's murder. The cities were on fire. Right now, and this isn't often talked about, I used to do fair housing for the state of North Carolina, and I didn't know it for years, is that the reason why people today want to get rid of quote unquote administrative state and get rid quote unquote of federal policies. I don't know if you know this, but every state by law is supposed to have a fair housing policy body that provides free assistance to anybody that has been discriminated against in housing, free legal counsel. And if they don't provide it, technically, the federal government can hold federal money. So what we see going on in that is actually a reversal. When you see folk trying to hold federal money to get people to act in unjust ways, that's not how it's supposed to be. The federal monies are supposed to be withheld if, in fact, the state is not providing plenty of assistance to an individual so they don't have to run everywhere to address a fair housing issue. So sometimes we just need to think about and remember how some laws were put in place. And I think this is important even in the church to make sure people have an understanding. Lastly, when we think about this as a theological issue, the reason why it's so important, I think, in the life of the church that we be engaged in this issue. I remember when, in the church I pastored, 5 people died from HIV and AIDS and nobody knew it, and then when they didn't, and what they told were stories that weren't true about the passing, and when I heard about it, I decided to take an HIV/AIDS test before communion on a Sunday morning as a way of saying that nobody in here will suffer alone anymore. Mm-hmm. That this is a safe space, right? And that any of us could be infected. We don't know. If you're in medical field and you've ever pricked your thumb. But the point is the church has to be a place where folk are not left alone, where they feel like there is a family, a place that even if it's not my issue, a person like my sister here or others can find a fellowship that will fill them with a sense of belonging so that they can engage the fight. And I want to read this quick quote from Moltmann. He wrote a piece called The Theology of Hope. And he says this, faith, and I think about your work, what you're doing. He says, faith, whenever it develops into hope, causes not rest but unrest. not patience, but impatience. It does not calm the unquiet heart, but is itself this unquiet heart in humanity. Those who hope in God can no longer put up with reality as it is, but begin to suffer under it to contradict it. And it is in the suffering contradiction that hope is born. That hope is born. Right. Hope comes when we are willing to get underneath it and say, this can't exist anymore. And on my watch, I'm going to be a part of challenging. And that's what I see in them. Because I know there's been some struggle and some suffering when you take on these fights, and you take on systems and all these kinds of things. But we thank you for the embodiment. And then for saying to us one other word, just in case we came here to hear about how bad it is in Detroit, you slipped it in and said, check your own tax records. and just because, and if you think it's just black folk, it may be black in Detroit, but in another city, it may be a poor white city. And there may be some whites and black. The majority are black in Detroit, but I would guarantee you that wherever there is power that's greedy, this issue is somewhere in the mix. Everybody can't embody in the community like our friend here and our sister here, but we, those of you that are going to go out and lead faith communities, you will be embodied in that community. And my prayer and hope is that you will never forget this lecture series, and not only will you have a communion ministry and a choir ministry, but you will have a finding out why people are losing their home ministry.
Amen.
And as a part of what you do. Jonathan, let's thank Dr. Forman, Attorney Forman. Let's thank our dear sister and author. Let's thank our testifier. Lord have mercy, we gotta have a testimony. And I want to give you all copies of this is the book about Forward Together, the Moral Monday movement. The first 14 weeks I signed it, but I'd like to ask you to get Al and get Rosalind, who else is here, and Nancy, some of the folks to sign it as a part of your library, if you would. Jonathan and I and y'all have got to sneak out. We got to go help somebody in another community, but you all enjoy the book signing, eat all of the food, make sure you make your curfew, whatever it is. And thank you for coming to the first and inaugural.
First and inaugural.
Thank you so much. Tell your sister I said hello.
Yes, I will.
Oh boy, got another one to go to. Maybe I can... Oh Lord, ain't that terrible?
Right direction. Hey, sis.
Bless your heart. We got I talked to you.
Yes. And I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but we had the best legal. It's a longer story, but no court has been able to hear the evidence, although no one just because of procedural issues. So it's a longer story.